First item, we are called to order. First item is attendance.
Okay, Corey,
Here.
Ellis,
Here.
Malone,
Here.
Geezy, Fellows, here, Park.
All right, new business. We have to approve the minutes from the February 12th, 2025 meeting. Everybody have a chance to read the minutes? Excellent. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes of the February 12th, 2025 meeting?
I move that we accept the February 12th, 2025 minutes.
So moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item B, fiscal year 2026 forecasting approach and budget build. Travis.
Thank you. So for those of you that weren't here at the beginning when I was explaining my absence, I've got some illness of some kind that's been with me for a week and a half, and so I figured I would spare y'all from that by not sitting in that tight conference room and breathing over everyone and probably coughing at several points. So I apologize that this is probably not going to be my best presentation ever, but I think it will be enough to at least convey what we're talking about, which is for this segment, just the talking about forecasting. It's really the follow up to the conversation that we had at the end of the last meeting, which is, before I'd just been taking an approach that said, all right, well, based on the 10-year plan, we're going to have X of total collections. And so we're just going to take X, another percentage of that over the following year. And where that got thrown off, and any approach that I still take will not necessarily address the park planning area issue, but it'll at least address the Micron phenomenon where when it's just commercial is driving everything, it hurts parks and helps police and fire. So I've come up with a couple different ways to look at it. I think that they're more precise. Hopefully they're also more accurate. So I guess just a couple things up front is, so on the 20, sorry, I apologize. There's a lot of words on this page and I don't like doing that because I basically just read the page off to you. But so the 25 estimates that I have in there are just really, they don't mean anything. They're not going to be updating any formal budget or anything like that. It's just in there to give an estimate of where I'm guessing the end of the year is going to come out, which the punchline is it's pretty much in line with where we were last year. And then there's a couple different approaches for looking at 26. There's what I've called the high level estimate, which is basically just looking at, all right, what's PDS saying they think they're going to see for growth in commercial versus residential. Then separately, there's getting a little bit more granular and breaking the residential out by multifamily versus single family. You'll as you see as we get into it, like all this, it's kind of shades of gray. It doesn't wholesale change anything, and it's just another way of looking at it and just seeing if getting additional granularity helps. And then the other thing is the final method is just using Excel, their statistical forecast. So there's no data manipulation there. It's just straight on whatever their forecast says, just to give everyone a reference for what the pure math would say. But again, obviously that can't take into account adjustments that we can see based on, what's going to happen with Micron next year. And given everything that's happening in the economy right now and the increased recessionary fears, none of that's been reflected. And I'm just trying to focus on Micron versus residential. And, obviously if something material were to happen over the next couple months, we could revisit this before we set the budget for 26. But I think these are reasonable starting places to talk about when looking at the 26 build. So here you can just look at overall impact fees, and you can see that there's obviously the big jump in 23 when we switched to the new fee schedule. Well, technically, I guess we switched in 22, but that was a partial year. So it really went and kicked in 23. So that's the big jump there. And effectively, you know, if you look at the statistical forecast for this year, it's 7.8. Prior to updating it for February and partial March figures, it was over 8. So overall, the trend is coming down of late, just as I think people are pausing due to the economic uncertainty that I mentioned on the last slide. So forecasting figures to be similar to where they were last year, maybe slightly higher. And then I guess the one thing that's worth pointing out is there's a little bit more parks development and a little bit less for police and fire. You can see the bottom two parts of the stack are just a little bit below where they were last year. And then looking at 26, again, these are just the different approaches for forecasting. 8 million is obviously pretty significantly below these figures by at least 10%. However, you know, given the questions around what Micron's going to be doing, given the issues with kind of rewriting some of what people I think thought were established grants and statutes and things like that, and whether or not we're going to continue to have the CHIPS Act funding effectively, or if they'll get incremental amounts, or if kind of what we have now is it for the time being. So I guess just at a super high level, does a figure of 8, again, slightly higher than what we've ever seen historically, slightly above what we're projecting for the year, does that strike anyone as wildly off?
Travis, can you scroll down just a touch? I want to see the bottom of that.
We can't
Sure.
see the legend, yeah.
Oh, you can't. Let me see. Let me reshare it and see if I can.
Sorry, when you say the legend, do you mean like where it was saying like West Bench, Southeast, things like that?
I just can't read the bottom on the screen here. I can't read the bottom, so it's hard for me to tell which column is which estimate.
Oh,
That's the part that I'm having trouble determining.
got
Yeah.
it.
Let me try again.
Try speaker view.
Yeah, just say I think I got it. Because that's what I had it on. Just looking at the slideshow, is this
Better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
There we
better.
go.
okay? I apologize that overall it's probably a bit smaller, but
But it
hopefully
works.
at least you can see the numbers at the bottom, and the rest of the pages are easier to see because of the stacks. Won't apply because I'll break it down.
Got it. And I kind of remember what the numbers were on top. So, okay. Committee, any thoughts about that $8 million number?
The statistical forecast in 25, which is the 7.8, I think. So if we take that versus the 8, then that's about a 2% growth. Is that right? No, not me.
Yeah.
Nobody said there'd be math. You know, and if you look at the forecast, the BBO forecast, then I guess it's about a 5% growth, which feels probably somewhere in that right.
Yeah,
average,
that does not
right?
seem unreasonable.
Yeah.
And the one thing that is built into here is, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the third item on our agenda today is talking about the annual fee increase. And so that is built into these figures too. So it's, even if you look at a number that's
Okay.
up roughly 5%, it's not necessarily, 5% of growth. It's, a growth factor plus the change in impact fees.
Well, I would say, given the level of uncertainties that you have outlined, I'm That's not an unreasonable number. 8 million is not an unreasonable number. The police and fire bars look pretty good. My concern obviously is what's happening in the housing building market. And like you say, we just don't know what that's gonna be like.
Right, and I think, you know, I would rather be surprised to the upside versus planning for parks or things like that that are relying on collections and then not having the collections to actually support those projects.
All right, anybody have anything else on the $8 million number? Okay, go ahead and continue, Chad.
Sure, and so the following slides we can run through just super quick because they're just breaking all the fees down. And it does look different when you see some of them broken out. Like when you look just at fire, you know, we're actually projecting a decline. Again, just assuming that Micron is backing off this year, and there's no reason to assume that 26, based on what we know today, would be fundamentally different than that. So again, looking at, you know, about 3.2 in both 25 and 26, which is a little bit below 24. Similarly on police, it's about, you know, 1.5 to 1.7, again, in line with 24. You know, the interesting thing is how low the statistical forecast is for police, which is most likely just reflective of, you know, a one-off or two-off impact fee collection this year that was just less heavily weighted towards police collections. So, for example, something that's assessed at the commercial industrial rates instead of something like the retail rates where, you know, there's obviously a lot more police fees for retail. Then moving on to parks, and the theme for regional is largely echoed in the local park areas. Again, where it's things are in line with where they were in 24, but probably slightly better than we're going to see this year. Again, this is looking at the regional level, maybe overly conservative based on where some of the forecasts are shaking out, but you can see also based on the permit type. So the two rightmost bars, they're largely on top of one another. Southeast, historically very difficult to project because there's one-off projects that have skewed 22 and 23. And there's, I guess, not a reason why there couldn't be another larger project, although they're somewhat space constrained out there. So again, just looking at something that's a little bit closer to the 24 and 25 projected levels. And on any of these, I'm just going to keep on rattling through them, but so feel free to interrupt me if there's questions. Southwest is, I would say, driving a lot of the change for parks collections overall next year. Just given the recent action by City Council on annexation out there, I think it's fair to assume that we're going to be probably seeing more permits coming in out there, and so therefore more fees. I guess when it comes to fire, I guess there's could accelerate the need for the new station out in that region, south/southwest. Obviously not being paid for by park fees, but again, it just allows us to see, like, if these trends continue, it might not be something where we're still, you know, closer to 10 years out. We're maybe closer to 4 to 5 years out.
I see Mark nodding.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I hadn't previewed that with Mark, so I was very glad that he wasn't doing this as I was saying it. Sorry, going up to North River, not a lot of change there. Down slightly in 25 from 24. and back up to kind of the same 24 level in 26. On the west bench, again, these are driven by larger projects typically. I mean, you can see with the huge fluctuations, there's kind of a baseline of just regular single families plus the multifamily units, of which we are seeing. I forget if it was in February or March, but I think there was actually a pretty large permit that came through recently that threw off the statistical forecast for the year in 25, I mean. And so I am projecting the amounts to be significantly above, more than double 2024, but well off of the statistical forecast as well. And then just kind of holding steady in the following year. But that could obviously, there's could be some downside risk there.
The red bar versus the
Yes.
green bar.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
lost the legend at the bottom again, so red versus green on the fiscal year 2025 estimates.
Oh, sorry. On these, there is no legend at the bottom because on that first page, it was just showing the breakdown of, well, I guess, are you able to see like the BBO forecast and statistical forecast? Or is
No.
that kind of,
No.
no? Let's try.
There we
There you
go.
go.
That's,
I just can't read that.
Like, so the.
Oh, I see, okay.
Nice.
You can see that they're there now, you just can't read them.
Yes.
So
But
what
yeah,
is
the
it?
red, sorry, go ahead.
No, you please.
Oh, I was gonna say that the red bars are just kind of the rounded numbers that the budget office is using. But
Thank you.
the green bars, at least in these boxes, are the projected based on the high level estimate, which again is just commercial versus residential growth. Again, the statistical forecast that Excel spits out based on, the last 10 years of collections, and then based on permit type. So again, trying to get a little bit more granular than just residential and commercial. Sorry, Jill, was there a question?
Oh, that answered it. Thank you.
Okay. Central bench is, I think, a big X factor as well. It looks like we're trending down this year from, a big increase in 23, then lower last year and trending lower this year and just basically staying flat in 26. This one, I think the next park there is Mariposa. Is that right, Sarah?
I think so.
And the big issue there is so far we still haven't paid off Franklin.
Good.
And, my guess is probably at some point in 26, based on these numbers, we're probably finally paid off. It would have happened probably during 26 at some point. So Mariposa is still out of ways. So it's not like we need to, fine tune whether or not it's going to be a 26 or 27 project. It's clearly past there if we're waiting to collect the fees before we begin the park. And that was all I had for that agenda item. Were there any questions? All right.
Doesn't look like any.
On the inflationary adjustments, and I'm not asking for a recommendation at this point, just using this for discussion purposes, and I'll bring forward a request with a memo for formal recommendation at the April meeting. This is just a recap, and I guess for Jeremy, it's not so much a recap, but an explanation of how we got to where we are. So when we redid our impact fee plan with Galena Consulting, a lot of their clients use the Engineering News Record Cost Index, specifically the Building Cost Index, for their annual adjustments. Which, are you familiar, Jeremy, with the ENR?
Yeah, very much so.
Okay. So I won't bother explaining that, or you could probably explain it to me better at some point. But yeah, so it's, kind of an objective one-stop shop way of looking at what costs are doing in the industry. Before we had a mismatch of different inflationary metrics that we tracked, and it was routinely underestimating the amount of growth that we were seeing in contract costs. You'll see in some of the subsequent slides what the increases are that this index gives us. But I think that the big question for 26, and I don't necessarily have a view on it, although I'm probably a little hesitant to get away from using the specific number that's given by, a non-biased index number, is, are some of the Micron impacts, since they're going to no doubt have very significant impacts on the cost that we see here in Boise. Should we be thinking about a different metric to capture inflation? And again, I don't have an opinion on it outside of the fact that maybe a mild preference for sticking with the status quo, just because that way we're not changing it, which seems opportunistic. And again, it's very programmatic and formulaic how we increase this. We stick with the current method. Just real quick recap of the building cost index versus the construction cost index. Basically, the building cost index is skilled labor versus common labor, which obviously the skilled labor is more relevant for most of our projects. Here's the cost history over the last 10 years or so. Again, this is the first year that we actually used the index for our adjustments. So this would have been 21 inflation that was done to update the 22 fees, 13.1%, 9.4%. And then last year was back closer to the historical norm where we've been taking somewhere between 3 and 4%. However, this past year, calendar 24 is a lot lower. And I think for at the city, at least based on what we're seeing, that is certainly below what we've experienced. Looking at it on a rolling basis, so taking up the period after the end of the calendar year, going into the beginning of the year, you can see that the building cost index, while it stayed flat, the construction cost index has more than doubled, which could be just a leading indicator in this case. Not sure why common labor would be a leading indicator for skilled labor, but maybe you use up the common labor first and then get your skilled trades involved. But again, there is that uptick over the last couple of months. And this is just breaking out the forecast. I got a little after all the impact fee revenue projections using Excel modeling. I got a little carried away and used the same thing here, just to look at based on recent trends where we could be. And again, I think that even at the 4.6 high level range on this forecast, I think I can make an argument that we will still probably see higher than that, given the fact that Micron is gobbling up every little bit of availability that the market has. And on the construction cost index, just because it's doubled over the last 3 months, obviously the range of forecasted amounts are all over the place. Not suggesting that we switch, again, from BCI to anything or from BCI to CCI, but just showing based on the recent trends, again, how much higher inflation could be as we continue through 25 and into 26. But ultimately, we're setting the inflationary adjustment based on what we experienced in 24. So our inflationary adjustments are kind of a year in arrears, effectively. And that was all that I had on that. Again, looking to get feedback and thoughts on, what the approach should be for 26. Again, stick with the status quo, or if we should be looking at something maybe a little bit more bespoke, given the Micron phenomenon. And then I would bring that forward in a form of a formal recommendation, or asking for a formal recommendation from the committee next month.
Thank you, Travis. Thoughts?
So maybe a discussion about, and I'm just thinking out loud. So if we underestimate inflation, that does what? Versus if we overestimate.
Yes,
So-
I mean, oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Travis.
Oh, I was just gonna say, that's one of the things that is the advantage of the way we've historically done it. And this is both before and after the most recent impact fee update, where we switched to using the building cost index, is using that system that's a year in arrears. At least we take out one variable, and that would be the fact that I don't think any of us are necessarily perfect prognosticators. But so by looking at it 1 year in arrears, at least it allows us to be specific with quantifiable information. So we're always going to be a year behind. But kind of to answer your question of what does that mean if, again, in 26, at this point, in calendar 26, we're having the same conversation where the index is remaining low. It just means that we're going to be collecting at a slower pace than we should be, given project costs. However, the offset to that is by 27, we will be basically ready to do another 5-year impact fee update. And so that'll be updating all the projected costs for projects anyway. So really what we're looking at is possible collections for under collecting for a year or 2 to 2.5 versus something that's going to set us back substantially, because that's the situation we found ourselves in during the last impact fee update. And again, just going back to, let me find the slide, this slide, that's why you saw the fact that fees basically doubled.
Mm-hmm.
When we updated the schedule or updated the plan, excuse me, because, we had been consistently, chronically perhaps, underestimating inflation. And so our costs were getting wildly ahead of our revenue collections. But the risk here is, again, it could be, we would be under collecting. However, I don't think it would be the same order of magnitude as what we've seen in the past.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, there's a couple of factors. One, we wouldn't have as much money as is needed to work on the projects, to complete the projects. And two, we'd have to do a more dramatic adjustment in the future, which makes people unhappy. Am I kind of summarizing that?
Yeah, the caveat that I would put on that second point is I don't think it would be in any scenario what we saw last time where it was a doubling of fees, just because, again, with the 13%, the 9.4%, and the 4%, like we've been doing a better job of keeping up with costs. For example, Fire Station 13, although we're not recouping the entire cost as projected with fire impact fees, between fire and police, we are covering the entire cost, whereas, under our old regime of how we were calculating the increases, I think fire stations would have been about $8 million a piece rather than 12 and change. So we're certainly doing a better job of keeping on top of these costs again. And so it'd just be a year or two of perhaps Micron throwing us off.
I don't think it'll just be Micron that throws us off, Travis. I mean, I think there are some larger market forces at play that would indicate that we can expect higher inflation.
I would agree with that.
So I mean, from where we're sitting in terms of trying to cost out projects and estimate them and program them, we are already expecting higher inflation than we've seen in the last 2 years.
Oh, wow. So are you thinking closer to 10 or more in the 5% range?
I'm thinking closer to 10,
Wow.
because
Yeah,
it's not just, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead,
I was
please.
just gonna say, it's not just like local labor, which is where we've seen impacts from Micron. But just in discussions on availability of materials and tariffs on
Tariffs.
steel and other items.
Wood.
And wood,
Wood,
right?
lumber, yeah, from Canada,
So,
absolutely.
it's a hard time to predict, and I feel like, you know, to the extent that we can expect additional inflation, it probably wouldn't be unfounded.
Yeah, and I
It's
think
at least defensible.
I agree. And the good news is, you know, again, looking at the model where we do this in arrears, so let's fast forward a year. You know, assuming that there are these profound price impacts from the tariffs, which, you know, 25% price increases would not be insignificant. You know, that would directly impact the building cost index. Again, just going back to the components of it, you know, we'd get steel, there'd be cement, there'd be lumber. You know, so those increases would be captured here. Again, we're always going to be a year behind unless
Right.
we switch our approach to try to forecast the future. But you know, hopefully, at least the industry-wide issues that you were describing would be captured by the index. It's just again like any additional impact from Micron gobbling up all the supply in the market would be not reflected in
Compounding.
the index.
And,
Yeah,
and it would be compounding.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Travis, I would be inclined to stick with the BCI for now, even though until you showed me slide 20, the one you're right on, I was perfectly content to stick with the BCI, but I know that 1.6% is too small.
Mhm.
However, if we just do it for 1 year, and if we're gonna reassess, like you say, by 2027, we're gonna have a whole new structure anyway.
Right.
Just back of the envelope calculations, we're not talking about in absolute dollars that much of a difference in an $8 million collection. So I'd still, for purposes of consistency, I'd like to stick with the BCI for now.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a known process that's been established. And so I think kind of arbitrarily, even though we all feel that's
feel it.
underinflated,
Yeah.
right? I think we can all justify it. It's defendable to your point, right? I just feel like in the public's eyes, I don't know if it's the time to just be trying to speculate without having the real hard data. And the ENR, as goofy as it is, and it isn't, you know, it's the top 20 cities, right? It's not Boise based, but it is a standard and everybody knows it. And it just feels to me that the dollar value isn't enough to put Travis or Ms. Council at risk.
Makes sense.
Perfect. So I will, if that is the committee's consensus, I will reflect such in the materials that I put together for next month. But I'm guessing we won't need to have much debate on it since we've already had the debate. So
That looks like consensus.
sounds good.
All right, is that it, Travis?
Oh yeah, that was it on my end.
Nice. Anybody got anything else? Then we are at item 4, adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Can we get a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.